When the Greek historian Herodotus said that the ancient Egyptians' land was given to them by the river, he was talking about the Nile, whose waters were important to the rise of one of the world's earliest great civilizations. The Nile runs north for 4,160 miles from east-central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. It gave ancient Egypt fertile land and water for irrigation, as well as a way to move building materials. The Nile was so important that it helped towns grow in the middle of a desert. People who lived near the Nile had to figure out how to deal with the river's annual flooding in order to gain from it. They also learned new skills and ways to do things, from farming to making boats and ships. The Nile even had something to do with building the pyramids, which are one of the most famous things left behind by their culture. Aside from being useful, the huge river had a huge impact on how the ancient Egyptians saw themselves and their world. It also changed their religion and society. The Nile was indeed the lifeblood of Egypt. Without it, Egypt might have died out like other ancient civilizations. The word Nile comes from the Greek word Nilios, which means valley of a river. But the ancient Egyptians called it Ar, or Aur, which means black. This was because the Nile's waters brought rich, dark sediment from the Horn of Africa to Egypt when the river flooded its banks every year in late summer. This rush of water and nutrients made the Nile Valley a good place to farm, allowing the Egyptians to build a society in the middle of a desert. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations says that ancient Egyptian farmers were one of the first groups to farm on a big scale. They grew food crops like wheat and barley, as well as industrial crops like flax, which was used to make clothes. Ancient Egyptian farmers even came up with a method called basin irrigation to get the most out of the Nile's water. They built networks of earthen banks to make basins and dug paths to send floodwater into the basins, where it would sit for a month until the soil was saturated and ready to plant. In addition to making farming possible, the Nile was an important way for ancient Egyptians to get around. Because of this, they became very good at building boats and ships. They made big wooden boats with sails and oars that could go farther, as well as smaller skiffs made of papyrus reeds connected to wooden frames. The Old Kingdom lasted from 2686 to 2181 BC, and art from that time shows boats carrying cattle, veggies, fish, bread, and wood. The Egyptians thought boats were so important that they buried kings and other important people with boats, and the boats were made so well that they could have been used to travel on the Nile. The Nile changed the way Egyptians thought about the land where they lived. They split their world into Kemet and Deshret. Kemet is the black land of the Nile Valley, where there was enough water and food for towns to grow. On the other hand, the hot, dry desert is Deshret, which means red land. They thought that life and plenty came from the Nile Valley and the oases, while death and chaos came from the deserts. The Nile was also an important part of building huge tombs, like the Great Pyramid of Giza. An official who helped build the Great Pyramid wrote in an old papyrus book about how workers took huge blocks of limestone down the Nile on wooden boats and then sent them through a system of canals to the site where the pyramid was being built. The close connection between the Egyptians and the Nile River led them to discover several Egyptian gods with aspects of the river, its annual flood, and the fertility and abundance associated with them. The god Hapi, for example, is the personification of the Nile's life force. He is also a symbol of the Nile's yearly flood. His round belly and skin folds are signs of plenty. Osiris is most often known for being the god of the dead, but he is really a god of rebirth and renewal. Artists often drew him with black skin to show that he was like the fertile Nile River and its silt, which gave life. The Nile River made ancient Egyptian society possible and had a big impact on it. Egypt has lived off of the Nile River for about 3,000 years, and they still do today. That is all we have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, you will certainly enjoy this video on the ancient people of Kushites that defeated the Egyptians and ruled them for centuries. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy this video. You can also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button so you never miss out on insightful videos like this. Thank you for watching. Till next time.